This video is going to cover how to draw from observation. So it should start by really closely observing whatever your subject is. So I have two different versions here, one on that black matte blanket, one on a reflective tabletop. And I'm looking at the quality of light, looking closely at my highlights and shadows, and I'm noticing on the tabletop that there's a lot more light that is being reflected off of the surface towards the bottom of the pear. And I think that that creates a little bit more of a dynamic image, a little bit more interesting values, maybe slightly more challenging. So I'm going to go with this one. Now the first thing I'm doing is breaking this structure, this form down into the simplest forms that I can. So I have a cylinder for the stem, a cone for that top part, and then a sphere for the base of the pear. And you can see that that pretty well describes the form that I'm working with. It can give me a general idea of where the highlights and shadows are going to be, but it's more complicated than that. So the next thing I want to do is I want to try to break this down into a series of planes. And I'm trying to observe the different directions that these different planes are facing. Some of the planes will be facing the light source, like the highlights. Some will be facing me, like the halftones, and some will be facing away from me, like the shadows. So you can use these different directions that the planes are facing to help you organize your values. And organizing my values is my next step. So I want to start by thinking about the vocabulary words that we've talked about and the value scale. And so that first line that I drew right there, that's the terminator line. That's the point where the light can no longer come in direct contact with the object, and it's the transition point from lights to darks. So on the side of the terminator line that's facing the light source, that's where you will have your center light, your highlight, like that really white glare, and then your halftones. And those will transition to the terminator line. Underneath the terminator line, you'll have your core shadows, and those are your darkest areas. And then you'll have the light that is hitting the surface and being reflected up towards the object, and those will bring in some of those lighter areas, and those are called your reflected light. And then looking at the bottom, I'm looking at the shadow, and there are two types that I'm concerned with. The really dark inner part is the occlusion shadow that's getting no light, and then the next ring out is the cast shadow, where you're getting a little bit more, but it's still being blocked from the direct light source. And I made a couple of mistakes there, a little brain fart. I wrote OL, it should be OS, and HT for halftone. All right, to get started drawing my pear, you'll notice I have a little value scale to the left and a little sphere. And you really want to make sure that you have a handle on the materials before you attempt to draw something like this. You got to be able to have enough control to do a good value scale and just to do a simple sphere. So I just have that sphere set up pointing towards the light source, similar to what my pear is going to be doing, and just a little sketch there, a little warm-up sketch, and just to make sure I'm feeling comfortable with the materials. And to get started on my pear now, I'm going to start with big shapes. Similar to what I walked through in the beginning of the video, I'm kind of seeing it as a cone and a sphere right now, and I'm kind of seeing it broken down into these planes, and I'm seeing that terminator line. So I'm not really thinking about details, and definitely not thinking about any sort of subtle shading. I'm just starting with areas, for example, that I know are going to be really dark, or big planes that I know are facing away from the light source, things like that. And once I am comfortable with kind of those bigger blocked in areas, then I'll start working in smaller and smaller areas and really refining my value and becoming more subtle with my shading. But I'm just starting big and working small. Now, as you can see, I'm starting to add white. Now, if I look at the value scale on the left there and break that into 7 sections, white would be 1 through 3, the paper would be 4, and then the black would be 5 through 7. Now my white is on the side of the terminator line that's facing the light source, so it helps me organize my value scale like that. You'll notice I do have some white that is at like the bottom of the pair, and that is from the light that's being reflected up, and it's serving as a secondary light source. That it's powerful enough that it actually is creating a little bit of a glare there, and that was part of the reason that I chose the image. So I thought that was interesting. So I've started to be much more concerned with my subtle shading and really paying attention to these little details and kind of taking a step back and observing it from a little bit of a distance, or maybe taking a picture of it. That can be really helpful sometimes too. You can take a picture of it with your phone, and then you can see it in a little bit of a different way, and you might notice some things. For example, I noticed that my highlight was too high on the corner there, and I had to bring it below the terminator line actually, and it was a reflected light. Uh, there's the finished study there. Now, a big part about this assignment is starting off with a really good and close observation of what you're looking at, seeing the different directions of the planes, setting it up in a way so that you have really clear highlights and shadows. You can see all these different values that we've been talking about. They're obvious. And the part of that is considering the light source, considering the surface that it's on. When you get a good setup, and you get a good object that suits your ability level, go ahead and get started.